In the frozen silence of a Bavarian winter, 6 people were executed with surgical precision, yet the most chilling detail isn't the blood, it's the footprints. On the morning of March 31, 1922, a set of tracks emerged from the dark edge of the woods, leading directly across the pristine snow toward the front door of the Hinterkaifeck farm. They never led back out. For 3 days, the farm remained a tomb of silent activity. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The cattle were fed. Meals were prepared in the kitchen. Yet, every inhabitant of the house was already dead, their bodies stacked like cordwood in the barn. This is not a ghost story, it is a forensic anomaly that defies the logic of human cruelty. To understand the horror of Hinterkaifeck, one must look past the violence and focus on the terrifying reality of the uninvited guest who lived among the dead. Hinterkaifeck was a lonely stead, situated 60 kilometers north of Munich, inhabited by the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, 72, his wife Kazilia, 75, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her 2 children, Kazilia and Joseph. It was a place defined by isolation and a reputation for coldness. Andreas was a man of steel and silence, known for his abrasive nature and a dark history of rumors that shadowed the family's name. But in the days leading up to the end of March, the steel in Andreas's nerves began to fray. He began telling neighbors about strange occurrences, events that sounded like the beginnings of a fever dream but were, in fact, the calculated movements of a predator. It started with the newspaper. Andreas found a copy of a Munich Gazette on his porch, a publication he did not subscribe to and one that no local mailman had delivered. Then came the keys. The heavy iron set for the tool shed vanished into thin air. He searched the grounds, the barn, and the house, but they were gone. Most hauntingly, he reported hearing footsteps in the attic, heavy, rhythmic pacing that occurred while the entire family sat at the dinner table. When he investigated, the attic was empty, but the lock on the door had been tampered with from the inside. The most logical explanation was a squatter, yet the physical evidence suggested something far more deliberate. The footprints in the snow were the final warning. They led from the forest to the machine room, perfectly clear, deep indentations in the crust of the frost, but the snow around them remained undisturbed. No one had left. The timeline of the massacre is a study in methodical patience. Forensic reconstruction suggests that on the evening of March 31st, one by one, 4 members of the family were lured into the barn. It was not a chaotic struggle, it was an assembly line of death. The weapon was a mattock, a heavy, pickaxe-like tool designed for breaking hard ground. The killer didn't just strike, they targeted the exact center of the skull with a force that suggested either immense strength or practiced anatomical knowledge. Kazilia the elder, Andreas, Victoria, and 7-year-old Kazilia were found in a stack, covered with straw and a discarded door. The youngest, 2-year-old Joseph, was killed in his crib in the master bedroom. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived only hours before the slaughter, was killed in her quarters. The physical brutality is only the first layer of the mystery. The second layer is the psychological profile of the 3 days that followed. Between April 1st and April 4th, neighbors saw smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney. When mechanics arrived to repair a motor, they found the farm seemingly functional, though the family was nowhere to be seen. The dog, a large Spitz, was tied up in the yard, barking at the barn, but someone had been feeding it. Someone had also milked the cows. The killer did not flee into the night, they stepped into the roles of the people they had just slaughtered. They ate the family's bread. They slept in the family's beds. They lived in the house with 6 cooling corpses, maintaining the illusion of life until the very moment the local search party arrived on April 4th. When the search party, led by Lorenz Schlittenbauer, finally entered the barn, they found a scene that defied the standard patterns of crime of that era. The bodies were not scattered in a panic. They were arranged. The youngest girl, Kazilia, was found to have clumps of her own hair in her hands, a horrifying sign that she had survived the initial blow and lingered in the straw for hours, perhaps even a day, while the killer went about their business in the house just yards away. The precision of the wounds pointed to a killer who was calm, collected, and intimately familiar with the layout of the farm. The investigation that followed was a descent into the dark heart of a closed community. The Bavarian police, hampered by the primitive forensic tools of the 1920s, struggled to find a motive. No money was stolen. Jewelry and gold coins were left in plain sight on the dresser. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was an execution, followed by a period of domestic occupation. The police focused heavily on Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had first discovered the bodies. Schlittenbauer had a complicated history with the family, having once been involved with Victoria. His behavior at the scene was noted as suspicious. He moved the bodies and touched evidence before the police arrived, claiming he was looking for his son. But the physical evidence, the strength required to wield the mattock and the stamina to stay in the house for days, didn't quite fit the aging farmer. The autopsy reports, conducted by Dr. Johann Baptist Aumüller, revealed a detail that changed the nature of the case entirely. The skulls were sent to Munich to be examined by clairvoyants, a desperate move that yielded nothing but further confusion. But the physical examination of the farm's attic provided the most concrete evidence of the killer's presence. There, investigators found a nest. Tucked into the insulation and hay above the kitchen were two indentations where a person had been sleeping. From this vantage point, the killer had been watching the family through the slats in the floorboards for days, perhaps weeks, before the attack. This was the source of the footsteps Andreas had heard. The predator had been living in the ceiling, breathing the same air as the victims, learning their routines, and waiting for the perfect moment of structural vulnerability. As the investigation widened, the list of suspects grew to include over 100 individuals, ranging from wandering vagrants to disgruntled former employees. One maid who had worked at the farm months prior claimed she quit because she was convinced the house was haunted. She had heard the footsteps and felt a constant, heavy gaze following her through the halls. Her departure paved the way for Maria Baumgartner, who met her end on her very first day. The irony is as sharp as the mattock. The farm was not haunted by spirits, but by a physical presence that had successfully integrated itself into the architecture of the home. The logistical challenge of the Hinterkaifeck murders lies in the silence. How does one kill 6 people in a small farmstead without a single neighbor hearing a scream? The barn was constructed of heavy timber and stone, providing a degree of acoustic insulation, but the precision of the killer suggests they controlled the environment perfectly. They didn't just wait for the family to come to them, they manipulated the family into isolation. Each victim was lured into the barn under the guise of an emergency or a chore, separated from the safety of the group. It was a tactical decimation of a family unit. The forensic data regarding the post-mortem occupation is the most disturbing aspect for modern analysts. The killer prepared warm meals. The stove was used daily. This indicates a level of comfort that suggests the killer felt a sense of ownership over the property. They weren't hiding, they were presiding. The cows, which were found to be well-fed and recently milked, provide a crucial clue. Milking a cow is a skilled labor, it requires a specific technique and familiarity with the animal. This points toward a killer with a rural background, someone who understood the rhythms of farm life and could maintain the facade of a working farm to delay the discovery of the crime. By the time the bodies were found, the trail was already 4 days cold. The killer had vanished back into the woods, presumably the same way they had arrived. Despite decades of investigation, including a reopening of the case by the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy in 2007 using modern criminal profiling, the identity of the Hinterkaifeck killer remains a void. The modern investigators concluded that while they could identify the likely psychological profile of the killer, the passage of time and the loss of original evidence made a definitive name impossible to produce. The skulls of the victims were lost during the chaos of World War II, taking any remaining DNA evidence with them. The story of Hinterkaifeck remains a monolith of true crime because it hits a primal nerve, the fear of the intruder who doesn't just want to hurt you, but wants to replace you. The evidence suggests a shadow self lived in that house, a man who watched from the attic, who knew the creaks of the floorboards better than the owners, and who, after the blood was shed, sat at their table and ate their food. The cold truth of 1922 is that the most dangerous place in the world was a locked house in the middle of a snowy field, because the locks were only designed to keep people out, not to keep in the thing that was already there. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck massacre was not merely a hunt for a killer, but a confrontation with the social rot of a closed society. When the Munich police, led by Chief Detective George Reingruber, arrived on the scene, they were met with a landscape of silence that had already been contaminated by the curiosity of the living. Over 100 villagers had trampled through the farm, some even cooking meals in the kitchen before the authorities took control. This chaos obscured the most vital evidence, yet one fact remained unshakable: the killer was a ghost of the family's own making. To understand the why, we must look at the structural history of the Gruber household. Andreas Gruber was not just a harsh man, he was a man accused of the unthinkable. Rumors of an incestuous relationship between Andreas and his daughter, Victoria, were the primary currency of gossip in the nearby town of Wangen. This dark internal dynamic creates a profile of a family that was already under siege from within long before the first blow was struck. The logical pivot in this narrative occurs when we examine the Karl Gabriel theory. Victoria's husband, Karl, was reported killed in the trenches of World War I in 1914. His body was never recovered. For years, the village whispered that Karl had not died, but had been captured, or perhaps deserted, and was waiting for the right moment to reclaim his home. This theory gains traction when you consider the tactical nature of the murders. The efficiency of the Massacre strike suggests a man familiar with the violence of the Great War, someone who had learned to kill in the cramped, dark silence of a trench. If Karl Gabriel had returned to find his wife had borne another child, Joseph, whose father was rumored to be her own father, the motive for a total family annihilation becomes a terrifying possibility. The killer didn't just stay in the house out of convenience, they stayed because, in their mind, the house belonged to them. But the forensic data offers a different, more chilling perspective. If the killer was Karl Gabriel, or any man seeking revenge, why the methodical care for the livestock? Between the murders on Friday night and the discovery on Tuesday, the animals were not just fed, they were cared for. This suggests a killer who didn't just want to destroy the family, but who wanted to preserve the farm. The psychological profile shifts from a vengeful soldier to a squatter who had successfully usurped the family's life. In 1923, when the farm was finally demolished to make way for a memorial, the ultimate piece of evidence was found. Tucked beneath the floorboards of the attic, near the very spot where the nest had been found, was the murder weapon. The mattock, still stained with the rusted remains of the family's blood, had been hidden in a way that suggested the killer intended to return for it. The mystery deepens when we analyze the behavior of Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who had sought to marry Victoria and who was the first to enter the barn. Schlittenbauer's actions were erratic. He claimed to have entered the barn alone, despite the others in his party being hesitant. He was seen moving the bodies, an act he claimed was born of a desire to find his son, but which investigators viewed as a calculated move to smudge fingerprints and alter the positions of the deceased. Yet, Schlittenbauer had an alibi for the nights in question, and his physical stature didn't align with the sheer force required to penetrate the skulls of 6 people with a single blow. The Bavarian police were stuck in a loop of circular logic. The crime required someone with the intimate knowledge of a neighbor, the tactical skill of a soldier, and the cold patience of a phantom. As the years stretched into decades, the Hinterkaifeck case became a study in the limitations of human justice. In the late 1950s, the last formal interviews were conducted, and in the 2000s, modern profilers utilized the same files to reach a conclusion that offered no comfort. They believed they knew who did it, but out of respect for the surviving descendants of the suspects, they refused to name the individual. The cold truth they hinted at was that the killer was someone the family knew, someone who had been present in the village for years, and someone who carried the secret to their grave. The synthesis of the evidence points to a terrifying reality: the killer was likely hidden in plain sight, perhaps even among the search party that discovered the bodies, watching the police struggle to solve a riddle that the killer had already authored. The final revelation of the Hinterkaifeck mystery isn't found in the identity of the murderer, but in the nature of the information gap left behind. Why did the killer stop? If they had successfully integrated into the farm, why did they flee just as the search party arrived? The most logical conclusion is that the killer was not a stranger at all, but a shadow of the community's own repressed violence. The footprints that led from the woods were the beginning of a cycle of blood that only ended when the house itself was leveled to the ground. Today, nothing remains of the farm but a small stone shrine in a field of quiet crops. But the forensic anomaly remains, a set of tracks that led into a home, a killer who lived among the dead, and a mystery that proves the most dangerous monsters are the ones that know exactly where you sleep. The truth of Hinterkaifeck is that you are never truly alone in a house if someone else decides it's their home too.